Okay, here we go. So this is the third part of the photographic golden triangle. What is one part of the golden triangle that we've talked about? Shutter speed. What about the other one? What's it called? Aperture. Which one has an F in front of the number? Aperture. Which one is in fraction form? Or it could be fraction form, or it could be like it looks like a 5 with two quotes after that. Would be 2 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds. If it had a 2 with a 1 quote after that, that's 2 hours. Yeah, you would do that at night if you were gonna get a night vision kind of cool looking thing there. All right, here we go. This is ISO. Does anybody know what ISO stands for? Here we go. The photographic golden triangle is composed of 3 different camera settings that adjust how your camera will compose, and you'll shoot in manual mode. We haven't started that yet, right? You don't have to write that down because that's on every single slide. Part 3 is called ISO. All right, we just reviewed what part 1 and 2 are. Can anybody tell me what I would be doing if I clicked on this? That's an A. So that's aperture. So what kind of numbers would I be looking at? Fractions? Decimals?
Decimals. Like 1.2 like that.
This one has an F in front of it. 4, yeah, we don't have a 1.2 on our cameras. There's too small, right? But a 4, an 8.6, a 22, right? Actually, I thought ours only went up to 22, but they don't. They go up in the 30s. So the smallest little hole is in the 30s on our camera. This one's manual. And so remember on our camera it had TV? This S is for? That's right. Okay. So ISO is the sensor's sensitivity to light. So now we're going back to the sensor, which would be the film or the sensor. So back in the day when we used film on our cameras, what they would do is they would put a certain amount of metal on top of the film. And the metal, the more metal you had on it, it was more sensitive to light, right? They're not doing that on a sensor anymore, but you would actually buy certain kinds of film if you knew you were going to be outside. So if you were going to be outside, you'd buy 100 ISO film. You'd put that in your camera because you knew that it would be able to handle a lot of light. But if you were taking pictures of my dance recital, which my mom was doing one year, you would buy like a 800 or a 1600 ISO film. You actually bought the film that did that. And I just remember one year when she took pictures of me on the stage with bright light and everything, it was like, and you could see my arm. It's because she had the wrong ISO film in her camera at the time. But we don't change film in a DSLR camera because our sensor can handle that. But what we're teaching the camera is this is as if you had this kind of film and this is as if you had this kind of film, right? It stands for International Organization of Standards. That is not on the test. I'm pretty sure that's not. But you might write it down. A high ISO is going to brighten up a photograph, and a low ISO is going to darken a photograph. So in ISO, it's 100, 200. This is an easy one to remember. 100, 200, 400, 800, 1600, 3200. They're doubled. 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64. They're just doubled, right? So a high ISO is for a brighter photograph, but it's not for a brighter day. So if I'm going to take a picture inside here with the lights out, I want a high number because it's gonna be able to detect more light. But if I'm going to be outside, I want a low ISO because it's super bright outside and it's going to make the picture a little bit darker. Does that make sense? Okay. Cameras have a range of ISOs. they start at 50 or 100. Ours starts at 100, I think, and doubling. 100, 200. You guys go next. And what's next? And then what? 1600 and 32 plus 32 is? Yep, 6400 or 6000. Okay. I have never had a camera in my hand that went this high. The highest it's gone for me is this 64. All right. So when you use a higher ISO, it allows you to correct when there's not a lot of light. So for instance, this looks like it's at night, like at dusk, right? And we're able to get we're able to get not just this would be easy to pick up, but we're able even to get the shape of this. It's not in silhouette, right? But it actually has its downfalls, all right? What does ISO do? When you turn up your ISO, your camera does two things. It makes your sensor more sensitive to light, so it will brighten up your picture, but it produces, this is definitely a test thing, more noise or grain. Those are synonyms. Oh, that has too much noise. Oh, that has too much grain. So noise or grain. Did you write that down? I think it's on there. Noise or grain. It produces more noise or more grain in your final image. And so therefore the ISO is often the last element that the photographer will adjust. Because when possible, you want the lowest number possible. Because the higher you get up in those numbers, it's going to add noise. And I'm going to show you some pictures of noise and grain in a picture. And you'll be like, oh yeah, okay, right? Did you guys get that? Noise or grain? So sometimes I say noise, sometimes I say grain, sometimes I can't remember what it's called. So those little dotty things, and you guys will tell me, okay? So little dotty things, here we go. A high ISO setting will force your image to sensor to be really sensitive to light. And so when you turn it up, usually over 800. 800, it's still okay. But if you get over 1600, you're also allowing more digital noise into your photograph. And here's what it looks like. Noise is what makes your photograph look kind of dirty. It looks kind of grainy. And you'll notice it more on your screen than necessarily when you're looking, not when you're looking through the lens finder. And you might not see it on the little screen, but when you put it on your computer, you're like, oh man, and you'll see a lot. Now, it doesn't mean that noise is bad. It just means that you need to know that it's there, and if you want that for your photograph. Does that make sense? Because if you're taking a portrait of someone at night and they're wanting to use this for their wedding, you don't want noise in it. You would probably add more light to them, like a flash or something, right? So, can you guys see that? So right up here, it's not really that noticeable. If you could come and look at my screen, you'll see little dots in the sky. Have you ever taken a picture with your cell phone at night and then the person looks a little murky? Even if your cell phone has a little flash on it and they just kind of look a little murky. So this image contains noise from an ISO. And probably what I'll have you do is just do a little search so you can see closer on your screens what that looks like. So if you take a picture and it's underexposed, it's dark, you have a few options. You can open up the aperture more. What's going to happen if you open that aperture more? All three of these things let in more light, but it's letting more light, and what is it telling your photograph to do when it's a big hole? It focuses on a smaller place, all right? So that's okay if you understand that's what's going to happen. You can increase your shutter speed, which we didn't get a chance to do yet, but we will, where it goes faster because it only lets the light in really quick, right? Or, I'm sorry, the other way around. An increased shutter speed will go slower and let more light in, but it also will cause blur, right? Or you can use a flash, or you could bump up your ISO, but just remember if you're going to bump up your ISO, you're going to get that, you could get that grainy look. So, in this example, let's imagine you're shooting a band at a concert. You've already opened up your aperture as wide as possible. Okay, your aperture is at the lowest you can do in on your camera. It won't go any lower. There's no way to go lower. And you're handheld, so you can't go below 1/60th, right? Because if it's 1/50th, what happens to the camera? It can be blurry. So if you can't do that, and if you don't have a flash, then you change your ISO. So in this case, you would need to use a higher ISO. This one has a flash. You should use an ISO of 100 or 200 when taking photographs in sunlight. If the sky is overcast, 2 to 4. If you're inside, 4 to 8. If it's dark, 16 to 32. But if you're walking around our school and you're taking pictures at 32, you'll be able to notice. So in our gym, unfortunately, it doesn't have enough light to take really good pictures. So a lot of times I'll put it on manual, and I'll even let it be dark, because I don't want to switch my ISO up too high, or it'll make all the athletes look really grainy. And then what I do is I come in with a really dark photo, but I take it in raw, which is what we were just getting ready to do. And then it's a huge picture, and then I use like a, I'll go on my Photoshop and lighten it that way, because that gym has the worst lighting for photography ever. Okay, nighttime or low light, 1600, depending on your shutter speed. Summary: ISO stands for International Organization of Standards. ISO adjusts the sensitivity of your camera's sensor to light, or the film. Remember I talked about the different film? And then a high ISO can create lots of digital noise or grain. Those are both synonyms. And unless you're purposefully trying to get noise, you should always try to use the lowest ISO as possible. And that's the end.